The grand ballroom sparkled like a scene from a movie, the crystal chandeliers scattering light across polished marble floors. The air was thick with the mingling scents of expensive perfumes, fine wine, and ambition. I stood at the edge of the room, watching my father, the man who had built a business empire from scratch, bask in the glow of applause. Everyone was here, colleagues, family, friends, even some distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, but as the designated dutiful daughter, I felt like nothing more than a prop in his performance. I had flown across the country to attend, hoping for a fleeting moment of connection. Maybe I would finally see a spark of pride in his eyes. Maybe a hint that after all these years, he understood me. But I should have known better. My father's version of pride had always been loud, performative, and reserved for the people and accomplishments he deemed worthy. And me, I was invisible, a constant afterthought. Useless daughter, he spat, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, as if waiting for laughter to follow. And follow it did, some polite, some cruel, all of it stinging worse than any slap could. The words burned through me like acid. Years of late nights running his business behind the scenes, quietly saving clients, managing deals he would later take credit for, they were all erased in an instant. Every achievement, every ounce of effort, dismissed in a single, humiliating sentence. I held my glass of champagne, feeling the bubbles sting my throat, trying to force a smile. My hands trembled ever so slightly, but no one noticed. The audience continued to cheer, completely oblivious to the storm building behind my calm exterior. I let my gaze drift to the balcony, letting the cool night air brush against my face. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to my pain. For years I had been underestimated, branded as naive, incapable, and too soft for business, but they had all overlooked one crucial fact: patience can be more powerful than fire. And I had patience in abundance. While he spent decades thinking I was frivolous, I had been quietly building my own power, securing my independence, and preparing for a day like this. The truth, which I had kept hidden even from him, was simple yet devastating. I wasn't useless. I had a trust fund, carefully structured, totaling $17 million. Every asset, every property, every investment was in my name, untouched and growing steadily while he basked in ignorance. It wasn't just money, it was a statement, a quiet but undeniable demonstration of my capability, my foresight, and my resilience. And tonight, in this glittering room full of witnesses, that statement would finally be made. My father had spent his life under the illusion of control, believing power and influence were his alone. He never imagined that the useless daughter he mocked would one day surpass him, not through brash confrontation, but through careful, deliberate strategy. I took a deep breath and adjusted my dress, a calm smile tugging at the corners of my lips. No one would suspect anything. The performance had just begun, and every second he relished in his imagined triumph brought me closer to my own. Tonight, the retirement party wasn't just about him. It was the prologue to a reckoning. Because, while he thought he was celebrating decades of success, I was preparing the moment that would rewrite our history. And when it came, the applause would be mine, and the humiliation he had inflicted on me for years would return with poetic precision. Patience, after all, is the sweetest form of revenge. I returned to the party after a brief moment on the balcony, walking through the crowd with a calmness I didn't feel. Each step was deliberate, each smile carefully practiced. To anyone watching, I was the dutiful daughter, composed and poised, unaffected by my father's cruel words. But inside, my mind was alive with strategy. Every laugh at my expense, every whisper of disbelief about my abilities had been logged and catalogued. Tonight, all of that would be remembered and repaid. I drifted near the hors d'oeuvres table, pretending to sip my drink while mentally replaying the years of subtle humiliation I had endured. From childhood, when he called me clumsy and incompetent, to college, when he dismissed my achievements as lucky accidents. To the boardroom, where my ideas were ignored until he reworded them and claimed the credit every slight had fueled the fire inside me. My father had always believed success was about loudness, about dominance, about showing the world you were the alpha. But he never understood the quiet power of foresight. As he mingled and laughed with colleagues, oblivious to the storm gathering in my mind, I reminded myself of the secret I had carried for years. The $17 million trust was no accident. Every property, every stock, every investment was carefully chosen, legally secured, and hidden in plain sight. It was my silent rebellion, my private proof that the useless daughter had been underestimated at every turn. Tonight, that secret would become public, a revelation that would shock everyone, including him. I checked my phone. The executor of the trust had confirmed everything was ready. A few taps, a few signatures, and the truth would be out. The timing had to be perfect. I couldn't let my excitement show. My father thrived on drama. He would have tried to ruin it if he sensed my plans. No, this had to be subtle, surgical, and undeniable. I wandered closer to the stage, where my father prepared to give his final speech. The crowd had grown expectant, glasses raised, eyes glittering with admiration for the man who had built an empire. They didn't know what was coming, and the thought made my pulse quicken with anticipation. I thought back to the countless times I had been dismissed, the late nights negotiating contracts while he received accolades, the countless hours spent correcting his mistakes, the whispered conversations with clients where I ensured deals went smoothly while he took the glory. Every instance, every slight, every moment of disrespect had built a foundation for tonight, and now all of it would culminate in a single, unforgettable revelation. A faint smile tugged at my lips as I imagined the reactions. Shock, disbelief, awkward murmurs, gasps. That moment when the world would finally see the truth. The daughter he called useless had quietly amassed a fortune, controlled assets, and strategically outmaneuvered him without a single person. Realizing it, I rehearsed my calm demeanor, no yelling, no dramatics. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the tables had turned. I had learned over the years that revenge wasn't about anger. It was about precision. It was about letting the world witness the consequences of underestimating me, while I stood above the storm, untouched and triumphant. Tonight, my father's retirement party wouldn't just mark the end of his career. It would mark the moment that everything he thought he knew about me, about his family, about control, was shattered. And when it happened, I would not only claim my victory but reclaim my dignity, my worth, and the recognition I had always deserved. Patience, planning, and quiet power, my father had dismissed all three, but tonight they would speak louder than any words he could ever utter. The room had grown quieter as my father stepped on the stage, glass in hand, ready to deliver his final speech. He smiled broadly, basking in the attention, unaware that the narrative he had so carefully crafted was about to unravel. The chandeliers above seemed to sparkle more brightly, mocking him in their brilliance, as if even the universe knew the truth was coming. I stayed seated at the edge, heart steady, fingers barely brushing the sleek surface of my phone. Every detail mattered: timing, delivery, visibility. As he raised his glass and began to recount his decades of hard work, I felt a calm, almost surreal clarity. Every word he spoke, every anecdote, every self-congratulatory laugh, fed the anticipation that had been simmering in me for years. Around the room, people nodded, clinked glasses, and murmured polite applause. Everyone assumed this was the night to celebrate him. They were wrong. I had rehearsed my moves countless times. The trust documents, the legal confirmations, everything had been prepared to reveal the truth with absolute impact. With a few strategic taps, I shared access to the trust and its assets through the company's internal network. Within moments, the room's polite chatter shifted to gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Screens on the corporate feed lit up with the details of my $17 million trust, properties, investments, and stakes that no one had ever associated with me. Shock rippled through the audience like an electric current. Colleagues whispered, family members gasped, and even some of my father's closest friends froze mid-toast. All eyes eventually turned toward him, the man who had spent years belittling me, and he looked vulnerable. His smile faltered, his words caught in his throat. For the first time, he was no longer in control. I rose slowly, letting the room absorb the impact. The murmurs intensified, and my father's confusion became palpable. I approached the stage, my movements deliberate, my expression calm. "Useless, Dad?" I asked, my voice carrying across the hall with a cold clarity. "I don't think so." The words were soft but precise, each syllable landing like a hammer strike. The room went silent. I could feel every eye on me, every heart beating faster in collective shock. Shareholders exchanged incredulous glances. Colleagues whispered under their breath, some audibly, some barely contained. And my father, he was frozen, the mask of authority and confidence finally cracking. Every plan, every calculated move, every ounce of patience I had exercised over the years culminated in this single moment. He had underestimated me for decades, believing I was incapable of strategy, incapable of foresight, incapable of proving him wrong. And yet here I was, standing taller than ever, the embodiment of everything he had failed to see. I allowed myself a small smile, not of cruelty, but of quiet vindication. The humiliation I had endured for years was now mirrored, perfectly balanced, in the eyes of everyone he had ever impressed. This wasn't about public shaming, it was about undeniable truth. The daughter he had dismissed, mocked, and underestimated had quietly outmaneuvered him without a single confrontation. As I walked back to my seat, the whispers swelled into conversations filled with awe and astonishment. My father tried to speak, to salvage the moment, but no words came out right. The empire he had built on reputation and dominance had not crumbled, but its narrative had been rewritten, and the world now knew who had truly wielded influence behind the scenes. In that moment, I felt a profound mix of triumph and relief. Revenge had never been about anger or bitterness. It was about reclamation, about proving to myself and the world that my worth was undeniable. Tonight, the scales had shifted, and my father, for the first time, understood the quiet power of the daughter he had called useless. The days that followed my father's retirement party felt surreal, like waking from a long, tense dream. Word of the trust's revelation had spread through the company and beyond, rippling out to friends, family, and even distant acquaintances. Emails poured in, some congratulatory, some incredulous, but each one carried the same unmistakable sentiment. The daughter they had all believed to be useless had quietly become a force to be reckoned with. Business associates I had barely met reached out, praising my foresight and strategic planning. Even competitors, who once dismissed me as inexperienced, now recognized that I had played the long game flawlessly. The empire my father had built was impressive, yes, but the daughter he had underestimated had become indispensable, a silent engine powering innovation, wealth, and influence. At home, the atmosphere was tense. My father, once the man who commanded attention in every room, now seemed diminished. He moved through the house quietly, no longer the boisterous center of conversation. He tried to apologize, of course, careful, hesitant words chosen as if for a delicate negotiation. I didn't realize. He began one evening, but I didn't interrupt. I listened politely, nodding, letting his words wash over me without granting the absolution he sought. Forgiveness, I realized, was a privilege he would have to earn, not a right he automatically deserved. I had learned too much, endured too much, and proven too much to let a simple apology erase years of neglect and humiliation. His regret could not rewrite the past, but it could highlight the stark contrast between his assumptions and reality. I spent my days consolidating assets, meeting with advisors, and quietly expanding my influence in ways that left even my closest colleagues impressed. The $17 million trust was more than just wealth. It was a symbol of resilience, patience, and strategic thinking. Every decision, every investment, every carefully planned move was proof that I was not only capable but unstoppable. Family gatherings became a different experience altogether. Relatives who had once whispered doubts about me now sought my counsel. Friends who had wondered if I would ever succeed now looked at me with genuine admiration, and my father. He was present but no longer the center of attention. The dynamics had shifted completely. One evening, as I reviewed a new business proposal, he appeared at my study door. His expression was sober, tinged with humility. I'm proud of you," he admitted softly, words he had never spoken before. I offered a small, polite smile. That was enough. The satisfaction I felt wasn't from his praise. It was from the knowledge that I had earned it in my own way, on my own terms, and without compromise. The real victory wasn't the money or the public recognition. It was the reclamation of my dignity. Every insult, every dismissal, every belittling comment from my past had been transformed into fuel for growth. The retirement party, once a symbol of humiliation, had become the moment of ultimate vindication. I reflected on the irony. The daughter he had called useless had not only survived his judgment, but thrived beyond his comprehension. His empire remained, yes, but my influence, my power, my presence now shaped its future as much as his ever did. The lesson was clear. Underestimation can be fatal when facing someone who has quietly mastered patience, strategy, and resilience. And so life moved forward. The whispers faded, replaced by respect. The laughter that had once mocked me now celebrated me. And the man who had called me useless finally understood the truth, not through words, but through undeniable, unassailable reality. I was anything but. Sweet revenge, I realized, was not loud. It did not need theatrics. It required only patience, intelligence, and the quiet confidence to let time reveal the truth. And in that, I had triumphed completely.